light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. I was chatting with a friend the other day about Carl Jung, and among psychologists, he's the one who was not afraid to cross the threshold into talking about spiritual issues and spiritual dynamics and so forth. In trying to bring the two together, though, because science has often been depicted as the enemy of spirituality, as if the world of spirit and the world of matter were somehow in opposition to each other. I'm not sure they are, but it's been a common sort of conclusion that people have drawn, because theologians would say, well, you just have to have faith, and scientists would say, but it doesn't stand up to measurement. And too often people were slipping into an either-or kind of thinking. It has to be either this or that. I found it curious, and I wish I could have talked with Einstein to learn more why he chose different words for the two parts, where it wasn't the same word. Religion without science is blind, but science without religion is lame. One has to do with perception, the other has to do with the ability to move, being able to walk. I imagine there are a lot of different directions people could build off of that in terms of the implications and how to apply that and so forth. The one Carl Jung said, I think on a somewhat similar note, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. Who looks inside awakens. On a similar note, somebody asked if I would address introversion and extroversion in relation to spirituality. It's kind of going back to Carl Jung's quote right there, that looking internally and awakening, and looking outside and dreaming, that there is something more that can be, but it has to start with something unseen within. In keeping what I said a moment ago, however, about spirituality and science, it's often been portrayed as this either-or sort of scenario, when the scenario that more often makes more sense to me is to do a both-and kind of construction. That it's about symbiotic relationships, each providing what the other cannot provide for itself but needs to survive. In the same kind of, the most obvious example, I suppose, is that people exhale carbon dioxide and inhale oxygen, and for plants it's exactly the opposite. So that by talking to their plants, some people have made their plants healthier because the plants thrive on all that extra carbon dioxide. And they return the favor by exhaling oxygen for us to breathe. It's a symbiotic relationship, each providing what the other cannot produce for itself, but needs in order to survive. In terms of introversion and extroversion, it's a similar sort of dynamic. There needs to be the extroversion that helps to form communities and helps to recognize who is or is not included, who's been sitting in the corner not saying a word, so that we need to gently, sensitively, kindly call them out and say, so-and-so, what do you think about this? You've been very quiet. We would love to hear what you think. But be sure when you say that you mean it, that it's not that the reason they're in the corner being quiet is because their perspective is an unpopular one and we really don't want to know what they have to say. Jumping to another movie, I guess, on exactly that note, though. Princess Diaries 2, where Julie Andrews' character, the Queen, makes the comment that if someone is going to be up to mischief, I want them right under my nose. The idea being that that's how she can keep an eye on them. In a similar sort of way, if we encourage dialogue with our enemies, we will be much more aware of our own weaknesses and know what to address and how to move forward. There's an obvious tendency, I suppose, unless you're looking in the mirror frequently, you may have no idea how you look or what the problems are. You may not know that your clothing is askew or your hair is out of place or whatever it is that you find in the mirror. There's so many things that we find in mirrors that we couldn't find any other way, because mirrors are essential to microscopes and telescopes, things that would be invisible without those mirrors. But it's the internal and the external. They're corollaries to each other. They operate very differently, almost oppositely, and yet they need each other, just the way plants need humans and humans need plants, or plants and animals, I mean. It's hard to figure out how to put this complex image into words. The extrovert runs the risk of creating a lot of social, societal health and interaction and symbiotic relationship that is all very, very good. But it takes the introvert, in my humble opinion, the one who is quieter and listens and focuses inwardly and does their work quietly without needing to be applauded, without being some kind of grand spotlight stealer of some sort. Within those inward sorts of ways and spaces comes the awareness of what it is that we need, who it is that we are. In being an extrovert, there's all of the expression with which the introvert may need help. The introvert can find all the inner stuff that's empowering, but then struggles to express it or to share it or to do anything with it that it makes it more than just an individual experience. The extrovert is very adept at communal experiences, but may be almost frightened of ever being completely alone or completely quiet, because then the only thing they will have for company in those moments is themselves, which is the one thing they know the least. And I'm not saying that all extroverts do not have self-awareness. I'm not trying to advocate those sorts of generalizations. What I'm reaching for here is a way to show how the two are symbiotically related, collaborative, that including both is a really good idea, but what they need, what all the different opposites needs, is ways to create a more effective dialogue with each other. The rich and the poor, the people of different races, the people of different religions, there needs to be dialogue about what is really going on, because if we don't know what is going on, disasters of all sorts can sneak up on us. By bringing ourselves to awareness, by using everybody's eyes to see all the aspects of the challenge or situation or anomaly. To me, it would be the positive next verse of the verse The Six Blind Men and the Elephant by John Godfrey Sachs, that after giving this summary of how theologians are forever arguing about something they've never seen, that there would be another verse where they decide that we've argued enough. It's time to stop. We can be done now. And in that, to begin to say, well, this is the piece I saw, and this is the piece I saw, and to put the pieces together. And as the pieces come together, to have a more complete and whole perception of what is this anomalous thing called life that behaves in so many different and totally baffling ways. If we aren't willing to look in both directions, if we're an introvert and we aren't willing to collaborate with extroverts, or if we're an extrovert and we aren't willing to collaborate with introverts, it's like half of the picture will always be invisible. Half of the knowledge will always belong to somebody else and not to ourselves. By joining hands, by having dialogue, even about very difficult things, we wind up a community, a village, if you will, that is able to take on all challengers because operating together, we know we will always win. Or we have confidence that we'll always win. It's conceivable, but I guess it would be a much more rare instance where everyone banding together wouldn't achieve the desired goal. Off the top of my head, I can't think of an example, but I'm sure there must be one out there someplace. I don't know that it matters, though, whether there is an example or not. That, well, it brings to mind, I think it was Benjamin Franklin. You can fool all of the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. By creating dialogue between individuals and communities, by creating that awakened interior vision and coupling it with or linking hands with that external industriousness, that we can wind up with a community effort that carries individuals forward, that carries communities forward, that carries life forward. In whatever we find ourselves to be, it's not that we should stop being it, but to first become aware of it, to awaken to it, to awaken to the full truth of ourselves. And from that awakened state, to then move into accomplishing what used to be labeled impossible. One more quote from Carl Jung that I'd like to share. I found on the internet that it comes back to this point of diversity, but also leaves us with you needing to be an inclusive world. The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. Well, because life is not a recipe, it's a relationship. You know, and having the relationships between the introverts and the extroverts, between the scientists and the theologians, between all different orientations and races and genders. By having that kind of village, that it creates a wholeness and a completeness and a productivity and an empowerment that allows anomalous individuals their turn at bat without supporting a dictatorship. A healthy community is not one that picks a dictator, puts that person in power, and then lets them do whatever they want. A healthy community is one in which anyone in the entire community could be the leader at any point because of, well, in athletics they would call it cross-training, but it's not, the community doesn't depend on one person. And thinking that a small group of bullies could run things because, well, that way they can control everything. Yeah, except that change is the only constant in the universe, and control is more often an illusion. But to the extent that a community depends upon a select few individuals to run itself, if anything happens to those individuals, the community immediately begins to completely flounder. During a recent presidential election, which doesn't really matter whether it was recent or not, but there was a lot of discussion about oligarchies as a system of government in which a small group of people are running things, and there was a lot of talk about democratic principles of communities coming together and individuals voting and speaking up and having dialogue and being a community rather than being an oligarchy or a dictatorship where one or a small group of people are running everything who may not have complete information to do the job well. The thing I've noticed, though, is that in countless small towns all across the United States. Oligarchies are already the way of operating, and perhaps that was why people didn't respond very strongly to that, because on a subconscious or maybe even conscious level, but I suppose somewhat subconscious, they're already living with oligarchies. They're already living with a situation in which a small group of people refuse to communicate with the other constituents and make all the decisions. Some of them turn out well, some of them turn out badly, but it is not a system of government in which the citizens themselves have any voice. The problem with oligarchies is, well, in terms of integrating any of this with spirituality, oligarchies essentially depend upon degrees of dishonesty and degrees of concealment. If the majority of poor and working class people knew their power, knew their ability, knew their numbers, knew their strength in numbers, all of it could quickly come to an end, because it's like this illustration I saw that someone actually posted on Facebook also, that it was a bunch of people bent over holding this heavy table above them, and various wealthy people essentially playing cards on top of the table. And the caption says, as soon as we stand up, the game is over. So, am I a political activist? Not really, but I am a citizen who believes in speaking up when the time is important to do so. But the problem with that, of course, is as long as you have oligarchies, it becomes dangerous for any one person to speak up, and all the more essential that we do this with unity and in unison. That in order for the problems to stop, it's all of us marching together to institute a new world, if you will. To the extent that it's one person speaking out, the oligarchy keeps eliminating the whistleblowers and eliminating the people who believe in transparency in government and democracy and so forth. And essentially the problem becomes enabled generation after generation. Enabled by the silence of the huge number of people who are choosing not to speak out because of what they've seen happen to the individuals who dare to speak up. The tricky part in that, in several different cases, was knowing when the time of change has come. In this fabulous documentary movie, The Singing Revolution, Estonia recognized when the time came, stood up without firing a shot, got its independence from the Soviet Union, and became its own country. But it was very much a question of timing, along with the solidarity of its people. In being an anomalous individual in the midst of all this, am I an introvert, am I an extrovert? I feel like I'm mostly an introvert, and yet here I am with my own TV show for more than 25 years now. Not because I'm an extrovert, but because I care, because I am a citizen of my community, I'm a citizen of my country. And, you know, there's the oath with which I think many people are familiar, that it's a commitment. Well, I would say it's a commitment that applies to every citizen, but I think it's a commitment that applies to political offices and also military offices, that says defending the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. The thing that people have difficulty recognizing, I think, is when the enemies are domestic, when it's attack from within. That it's not an invading army we need to fear so much as it is a population of citizens that no longer care about their foundational documents. That when we say we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people were created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's a whole lot of laws on the books now that are not about maintaining civil rights, they're about maintaining oligarchies. And it's the citizens that I hope will awaken, that will look inside more than outside, and awaken to what needs to happen, what is essential to their very soul as a people, as a nation, as a community. It's easier in some respects to let oligarchs and dictators run the world. I guess I would say that if someone is content with that, well, that brings me back to a quote, I believe it was attributed to Dwight Eisenhower, but I'm not positive on that. But it was a quote I saw several years ago. Those who would deny the blessings of liberty to others do not deserve it themselves. In any case, I read a lot of different things. I remember a lot of different things. I'm inspired by a lot of different things. But I think what inspires me the most is when people dare to love one another and dare to stand up and dare to look inside for the best that is within themselves. Ultimately, I think it is all connected. It is only our understanding that is lagging. But if we will sit with each other through our times of struggle, and if we will feed the hungry and shelter the homeless and clothe the naked and do the fundamental kindnesses that are inherent to every spiritual and religious system humanity has ever created, we wind up with a world in which you can be as conservative as a Republican politician or as unaffiliated, independent, and innovative as Sister Who, and know that it's a very broad spectrum of humanity, and you are free to be anything and everything in between, and even beyond both of those ends of the spectrum. When it is truly safe to be whoever and whatever you find yourself to be, and not just about fitting in. When it is about being there for each other no matter what. When the saying, I may disagree with your opinion completely, but I will defend to the death your right to have it. I believe that's a paraphrase of a more historical saying, but disagreeing may be the most important freedom we have, but every bit as important as that freedom is having the commitment to each other. I know I've rambled through a lot of diverse thoughts here in this episode, and I don't expect anyone's going to remember everything I said in this half hour. I come on the show because I have thoughts, and I have feelings, and I have compassion, and I don't think the lack of a credential or the lack of a certificate or lack of anybody's permission should be the reason that one doesn't do all the good one can do throughout one's life. I just hope most earnestly, though, that something in my contribution, something in my creative, albeit anomalous work here, has been helpful to you during the last half hour, and that you will find yourself more inspired to try new things and to go beyond any of your previous definitions. To know, first, now, and always, I guess, that life is worth living, even in the worst of times, because there is always the chance that better times will follow. And there have been so many instances in which the forces of evil have declared a commitment to eradicating good, and over and over and over and over again, they failed. And we're still here, and good is still here, and love is still here. And we have the ability to be together, to live according to our principles and our unique spiritual beliefs, and to forge a better future than anything we've seen so far. But it may very well mean examining all these systems and all these, perhaps this chaotic presentation of ideas, and organizing and forming it into something new and better than anything we've known so far. I suppose some people wonder why I leave all my verbal stumbling in here. I'm certainly no expert on a lot of different things, and I'm recording most of my shows now, nearly all of them, strictly off the top of my head. Everything could be pre-scripted and made eloquent and so forth, but I think there's an honesty in speaking off the cuff, and the bigger problem is that I really don't know who will be watching or what will be meaningful to them. And I've heard so many times of when I thought what I said was totally ridiculous and off balance and awful and awkward and so lacking in eloquence, and boy, that sounded really stupid. And then I'll hear from someone who says, yes, that's exactly what I needed to hear. I needed to see someone who was real, and you gave me that. And so my commitment is to continue being honest and real with everyone who watches my show, and to trust that somehow in all my stumbling and with all the different things that God can do with my humble offering, some good may still come of this. Thank you for watching.